All right, and this brings me to, this is always deliberate, the very talented group of people that are on stage with me, introducing our CISO and industry leader panel. So first, Ranjeet Saini, from the CIO from Langara College. Thanks, Heather. John Stevens, the CISO from Convergence Networks. Hong-Lok Lee, the CTO from the Alma Mater Society of UBC. And of course, this is a familiar face, back for round 2 today. Adam Evans, Vice President, Cyber Operations and Chief CISO from the Royal Bank of Canada, and today's moderator for this discussion. So I think you've heard enough of me talking for a while. So I'm going to hand it off to, again, this very talent. I want to give a very sincere thank you to these four for their time, their talent, their expertise. This session is Securing the Future, Current Cyber Threats and Strategic Defense Practices. Panel, take it away.
So just to be clear, what time are we done?
You got till 4 o'clock.
Excellent.
1 hour.
All right. Okay, well, thank you very much, folks, for having us today, and obviously my return to the stage. You have to put up with me for another hour, but we are giving you cocktails when this one is all done. So hopefully you guys stick around, and we can have some conversations over in the hall where the cocktails are going to be served, or outside here. But we're going to cover a bunch of different topics today, and we've got some questions that we've been given, and then we're going to start hopefully broadening out the conversation a little bit, freewheel a little bit. I think it'll be a little more interesting if this is conversational and we can sort of tackle some topics from a senior leadership point of view inside of organizations and how we're dealing with some of these problems that are facing us today. And I'll try to keep it sort of random as we go through the group, and I'll flip questions. But certainly if you've got questions, we'll save some time at the end. We want to make sure that you're getting something out of this session, and that if there's things on your mind. I had some great conversations after my session this morning with Galnouche, and hopefully today and this afternoon we get some more participation from you guys to finish out the day, and obviously we can address any questions or issues that you guys have. So maybe we're going to start with an easy topic, which is going to be artificial intelligence, because I talked about that one this morning. In managing that emerging risk landscape. So, when organizations are adopting AI responsibly, and we're trying to manage some of those risks as we move forward, whether it's generative AI, LLMs, legacy AI, if you can call legacy AI, let's talk a little bit about how we are seeing, or how you're seeing, the tradecraft and the attack techniques of threat actors evolving over time. And obviously, we all work in very different industries. I mean, you two are working in academia. John, private, I'm private. So maybe we'll start with you, Hong. And, as we sort of talk about it, how are attackers already leveraging AI? What are you seeing in your worlds? And, as you think about the next 2 or 3 year horizon, what really keeps you up at night?
Good question. Thank you very much, Adam. And good afternoon, everyone. AI is operating on both sides nowadays, enabling sophisticated attack while simultaneously improving defense capabilities. There are already many kinds of AI-specific threats, such as adversarial attack, data poisoning, model inversion, deepfakes, or even AI-enabled social engineering. These attacks challenge traditional security control while undermining organizational trust. At the same time, organizations are accelerating cloud adoption and AI-enabled automation, which expands operational complexity and attack surface. And what really concerns me most is many organizations, they're adopting AI at a speed or pace much faster than the governance maturity. And they're focusing much more heavily on the capacity of AI while underestimating the governance challenge that accompany it. Now, cybersecurity leadership today is no longer just about deploying technical control. It increasingly sits at the intersections of governance, operational resilience, and institutional trust. And addressing this risk, the traditional cybersecurity control is no longer enough or sufficient. Organizations definitely need, in the next several years, specific AI-specific practice within AI lifecycle. I'll give you a couple of examples. For example, model robustness testing, which involve techniques like noise injection to strengthen model against manipulation. And then the next one, you may ask, how to protect AI sensitive data? That's the key point. We have to apply something like called secure AI architecture. Example would be AI firewall, secure enclave, or even encryption method like defensive privacy. Equally important, we cannot forget how to deal with data poisoning and model inversion, which means that we have to use continuous validating, training data, plus monitoring anomalous behavior. And most important of all is appropriate human oversight for critical decisions. And lastly, I want to emphasize one point. Business innovation should not compete with cybersecurity, because strong governance will enable responsible governance. And as CISO ourselves, we help organizations innovate with confidence while protecting the trust that make the innovation possible. Technology is what we protect, and the trust is why we protect it. And those organizations that will be successful in the future, to secure the future, they're not necessarily those adopt the AI the fastest, but those govern the wisest.
I would tend to agree. Ranjeet, as you sort of think about it in academia as well, you've got, academic networks, academic technologies, very, very different than we would see in the corporate world. When you think about the threat surface you have to manage and how threat actors are leveraging AI to target you and your organization, how is it changing how you think about protecting an academic institution?
So I think the biggest concern on my side, to your point, is we have a lot of attack vectors. When you look at corporate devices, when you look at student devices that they're bringing in, every 4 months we have new students that are joining our organization. It's students that may not have technology experience. You may have faculty that haven't met these students yet. The opportunities are right. For me, one of the scarier things is when I look at the deepfake that are coming out now. About 3 months ago, I got a video link from a random person I'd never met before, and it said, deepfake of your CEO. And so it's like, click this link. So obviously I checked the link before I clicked it, but there's a deepfake. And I mean, all it takes is, the brilliant speech that we just heard a minute ago from Hong, if someone had that on a video, they could go and make a very convincing deepfake and start these conversations. All it takes is a student to replicate a faculty member and then go to another student. And when you look at academia, we have students coming out of high school, so they're 18 or 19. We have international students where English may not be their first language. They're already scared moving to a new country, a new environment. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to be scared or confused by someone pretending to be your instructor. Hey, Adam, you were in my class yesterday. I want you to do this. Can you send this to me? Or click on this link. Or, hey, I'm going to fail you unless you give me a $500 Apple gift card and go and do this. When I say that to you guys, that's obviously no teacher would ever say that, right? But you don't know that. You're still 18, you're learning the new world. You might be out for the first time. Maybe you moved from, Prince George and Nanaimo, wherever you are, to Vancouver, and you're not used to the big city. So when you look at the opportunities for attack on all these young, impressionable minds, that's what scares me the most.
So can I just jump in and ask you another question while you're on a roll?
Yeah.
So when you think about setting the culture in an academic institution, and you were talking before we sort of jumped into this conversation about coming from healthcare, What's the difference in setting a culture at an academic institution versus a private company in healthcare, banking, whatever it may be?
So when you look in healthcare, it's very stringent. It's very hard to implement new technologies because you have physicians. Physicians don't want change. They don't want a new device. They don't want anything unless you can guarantee them on day one it's going to make their life easier. So when you look at AI transcription, for an example, that's a very hot thing in healthcare because it actually alleviates work on them. When you look at academia, they're not as stringent. They're more than willing to try new technologies, new things that are going to go there. And if it, to your point earlier, if it's not secure, you could just throw a new tool out there and all of a sudden you're in trouble, right? If you look at a physician, they're very smart, they're very brilliant at what they do, but they're not typically technologists. When you look at academia, you obviously have, business technologies, you have computer science, you have people that are both well-educated and also technologists. So it's very scary when you look at shadow AI or some of those risks they could do or building their own applications for their students and the vectors that could bring in. So you have the exact polar opposite from healthcare, where they don't want to innovate, they don't want to bring in new technologies. Academia, complete opposite. Bring it in, let's go.
John, so coming into the private worlds and working in an organization, running security for an organization, talk a little bit about how you manage the threat surface for your organization, and we're going to get into it in a little bit. How do you push that agenda inside of an organization, public, private, whatever the case may be? But for you, as the CISO of Convergence Networks, what are you concerned about, and what's the tradecraft or threat actor tactics that you're seeing targeting your particular sector and your particular company?
So what's funny about being in the service industry, in particular managed services where you're supporting a broad variety of clients, is I'm listening to us talk about academia. I'm here listening and hearing points about healthcare. And then there's manufacturing and all these other areas. And in fact, that all rolls up because we service clients in those industries. And so what's really funny is you have to think about all those industries, and you're never going to be an expert in them like somebody who's in the industry, but you have to know enough about what's going on to know what's suitable for that. Meanwhile, my primary job is protecting our organization, and we've got offices across the US and Canada. And one of the things you heard in the other presentations earlier is the supply chain, the supply chain, the supply chain. Well, MSPs have become a preferred target too, because they're not just an organization with X number of employees. Those X number of employees might be X to the 10th number of endpoints that could be possibly compromised if you could get into that organization. So for us, it is something where you have to plan very broadly for all the different attack vectors. The risk assessment looks like somebody just threw a bunch of risk assessment definitions against the wall, because we have so many different industries that we have to be worried about. And as we have grown, it's one thing to be a 50-person organization operating in one geographic area. It's another when you're hundreds of employees operating across both the US and Canada. And so it's changed, and I can't really say that, at least in our environment, we never have the same day twice. And
100%.
It can be really challenging. The other problem is, and there may be some of you in the audience who have the same problem. We are a growth-based organization, so that means we're doing organic growth, but we're also doing acquisitions. And so you add in keeping track of all these industries, all these different privacy and regulatory frameworks, and then let's add somebody's entire new business into what we do. So it can be a little bit hard to focus on any one thing, and you end up trying to just stay ahead of the grinding wheel.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. I think having been a CISO for over a decade now, it is getting infinitely harder to stay educated, infinitely harder to understand the techniques, infinitely harder to understand the tech landscape. And in the next 3 years, 5 years, we're going to go through these monumental shifts where we've got AI coming in. We talked about it this morning. It is a step shift from a capability point of view, but it also presents a totally new set of challenges from a security standpoint. You have quantum coming down the pipe at the same time. That is going to touch every piece of technology in every organization that is in this room today. So the compression, I think, is something that we're all sort of feeling as we sort of move into the future here. And I can certainly tell you, I talked a little bit about it this morning, this whole notion of industrialized crime. In 3 or 4 years, our CEO has become the most attacked Canadian. And when Justin Trudeau was the Prime Minister, he was the second most attacked Canadian, and now he's the most attacked Canadian inside of social media from an impersonation standpoint. Threat actors are using things like video fakes and audio fakes. Deep fakes, I would say yes, but not as frequently used. But it's lending legitimacy to the scams that these guys are setting up, and they're starting them in social media, and they're using the likeliness of our CEO to lend legitimacy to the campaign. And then you can imagine the reaction from our CEO when he starts seeing his picture splattered all over scams that people are being defrauded by, some RBC clients, some not RBC clients. And it's really difficult for us to exert influence outside the walls of the organization. But you're starting to see threat actors using that influence more and more. Geopolitically, I think you're starting to see threat actors are leveraging it for influence campaigns. They're trying to shape the outcomes of political processes. Like, there are so many different things that are at play right now that threat actors are using traditional systems for, but when AI has been brought into it, I talked about it this morning, that industrialization, now that's what we're talking about. It's multiple attack vectors with multiple types of campaigns, 24/7, 365. And it can be your company, it can be your client, can be your government. It is unrelenting. And that is the new business landscape. When I talk about it internally in my company, I'm sure you guys do as well. This is the new business landscape. So you have to understand how this landscape works and the threats and the gotchas that exist in that landscape. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. Now, we all hold different positions. You're a CISO, but Ranjeet, you're a CIO. Talk a little bit about how leadership has changed, because I've seen certainly a massive shift in the amount of knowledge and the topics that I have to be able to speak to on any particular day. Maybe we'll start with Ranjeet, and then we'll cut across the group. But talk about sort of moving into a CIO function. How are you seeing it change? What is being expected of you in this new role? How do you interact with business leaders in academia? And then we'll sort of make our way through the group.
So when I look back to 15, 20 years ago, and I look at whomever the top technologist was in my organization, they were very technical, and they were seen as the IT guy. They weren't seen as the healthcare guy or the academia guy or whatever sector it was at the time. And they were always considered the IT guy, the cost center guy. He's going to come or she's going to come and ask for more money for this solution or this firewall. When I look at how technology's evolved from then to where we are now I see the IT leader. So I had my interview, just for transparency, July to September of last year, before I got my role. And in my last interview, we talked about how this role was going to be the lead technologist for the organization. Obviously, they have the CIO title. And I said part of my vision is that that's not how I would sell myself to a new sector, to a new organization. I need to enthrall myself in the business, in academia, in student outcomes. So, when I look at our organization and our 5 pillars for success, that's where I need to focus on, not IT. One of those pillars was technology utilization, but I would be limiting myself as a CIO to say that's all I'm focusing on. Because there's 4 other pillars of support for all of our students in our organization. So when I look at technology leaders today, they need to understand the outcomes your organization is looking for. What are we trying to do? So for Langara, our tagline is, Premier's Pathways College. We're the largest college in BC that transfers students to UBC, down the road from us in Vancouver. So what is our mandate? We may only have students for 2 years before they transfer, or 1 year. So how can we focus on their success and get them ready, going from high school to a college to a university? As someone who has done that journey in Victoria, from Camosun College to UVic, it was a big jump from high school to college to university. And now when I look at it as a technologist standpoint at the top, I have to make sure that technology doesn't hinder them when they're working forward. So if I introduce too much friction, when we talk about user friction or business friction, then you lose people, right? You'll lose staff, you'll lose students, then they'll go to shadow AI or shadow IT purposes. So you need to have that right blend. And I think that's where leadership comes today. It's not just being the IT guy, it's how can I protect everyone and still focus on those business outcomes. Because if you don't have the business outcomes, you've lost the room already.
So Hong, you talked a little bit about business enablement. And so I said you were a CISO, you were a CTO.
CTO.
When you think about business enablement, this, if done right, security can be an absolute business enabler. It can allow the business to move as fast as it needs to move to stay competitive in the business environment that it operates in. So can you talk a little bit about enablement and how you think as the leader of the technology organization, how do you think about enablement? How do you connect with the business priorities? And then obviously, how do you make sure that you're focused on the right things to allow that acceleration to happen?
Yes. Now, first of all, business-aligned cybersecurity leadership begins with recognizing technical IT function, or cybersecurity is no longer just a technical IT function. It is a governance, operational resilience, and a leadership function that support every part of the organization. And as modern security leaders today, every one of us, I believe, including myself, we must understand not only infrastructure or threat model, but more importantly about governance models, operational behavior, business risk, regulatory expectation. Those are extremely important. Also, nowadays, it is very important to realize that the ability to communicate clearly with your executive leadership team, insurer. I'm a signer of the insurance of our organization. That's a lot of responsibility. And also auditor, and even legal team. These things, they didn't happen probably 10 years ago. So our roles has already changed significantly. So to communicate clearly, that is as important as technical expertise itself. Now, another thing is extremely important and interesting as well regarding human oversight. That's when you're asking about how to manage AI properly, especially AI security, which differs from the IT security. That is, if you are going to summarize a few words, that's very simple. It's called governance, supported by human oversight. But what about human oversight? I have to elaborate a few sentences over here. Is that agentic AI patterns are evolving rapidly nowadays. However, this system today, up to this moment, are still being built vastly based on generative foundation and judgment, and the prediction under certainty. It's called prediction under certainty. So typically, there are three types of AI available at the moment. We have to realize that very important. First one is generative AI, which is pattern-based, okay, which produce. And then second one is cognitive AI, which is reasoning-based. It comprehends. And the third one is agentic AI, which is autonomy-based and acts. The situation is that the most important thing, think about this way. Agentic AI and cognitive AI, they work side by side. And agentic AI is supposed to stand on the shoulders of cognitive AI with contextual understanding, combining understanding and reasoning to provide autonomous action. However, up to this point, the multimodal learning model, which is vital to cognitive AI, has not reached a level of sophisticated reasoning, deep understanding, and also flexible adaptation required for the true, authentic, agentic AI system. Therefore, human oversight, governance discipline, and institutional accountability remains extremely important. And that's our responsibility to just watch it closely with a very, very healthy governance structure for your organization, which means that you have guidelines, policy, committee all together, and IT will be doing the independent assessment about your request and passing all these body to make sure every request is safely executed. And I'm the CTO and CISO to ensure all these things happening.
Thanks, Hong. John, operating as a CISO inside of a private organization, talk a little bit about your role in that organization and how are you guys structured to drive the security culture of that organization? And how that role has changed over the course of the last few years.
Well, so for us, the role has changed not just as the role has changed in reaction to the current technology and the evolution of cybersecurity. We started out as a regional MSP, and then as we have grown, we have been bringing in other aspects of the business. And so the reason I think it's important to point that out is that when I first started, I was taking care of our internal cybersecurity and compliance as a side gig. It wasn't even my primary job. And there's probably a lot of you out there that have that very same situation or something similar. And over time, our organization, being in technology, realized that, well, it doesn't matter how good a job you do for your clients. It doesn't matter how good the technical wizardry of your engineers and your systems administrators and everything else is. If you have a breach, you can be done. And so what's happened in my world is that we have assigned greater and greater and greater significance and priority to security. In regard to where I sit in our organization, I report to the CEO. It's not something where, you have to work through this person, this person, this person before it even gets to the leadership team. I sit on the leadership team. Every week we have a leadership meeting, and security is something that ultimately, it doesn't matter what we're doing in the business. To some degree, I get to say, oh wait, veto power, because yeah, we should do that, or we can do that for business, but we have to do it securely, because the whole time you're operating, you're standing on a precipice where if you go down, if you fall off because of a security blunder, whether it's your fault or not, whether it's supply chain or what have you, your reputation in the tech industry taking directly care of clients is gone. And so, that's my biggest fear is how do I stay ahead of that game? And one of the things that, I found really notable about a lot of the presentations, we talked all about AI, and I'm sitting here thinking AI, AIO, old McDonald had all this stuff. But how many of you feel like you're ready to tackle that because you're already doing all of the basic foundational things? You've got the budget, you've got the detection capabilities, you've got the monitoring capabilities, you've got the good administrative policies. The gentleman earlier was talking about technical, administrative, and physical controls, TAP. Do you have all that? Well, you know what? They don't even have to get out the AI machine gun to take down your organization if you're not doing those fundamentals. And I know it's kind of speaking counter to the narrative we've been talking about today, but I work in the SMB space, and there's so many organizations that aren't doing those. And so, yes, AI is critical. Quantum computing and the advent of that technology is going to be critical. But that doesn't mean that you can be distracted by the latest, greatest, flashiest pink squirrel of the afternoon. You have to start doing those fundamentals. And in the SMB space, people are there because they do one thing good, whether it's making widgets, whether it's providing services, healthcare, what have you. But in today's environment, everybody has to be part of the cybersecurity defense. And so for me, I think it's really critical that the importance of cybersecurity has increased. The closeness to strategic leadership has to increase because it's an existential threat for many organizations, but it doesn't negate the fact that you have to keep doing all the things that you were doing before.
Agreed. Just by show of hands and interest from myself in the room, how many people in here are responsible for their security programs inside their organization? Okay. So I've been doing this, as I said, for about 10 years. And what I will tell you is when you are the security leader inside of the organization, you are a trusted advisor, you are the strategist, you are the protector, you are the technologist. You wear all of these different hats on a daily basis. And it could be speaking to the board in 1 minute, you could be having a P1 incident the next minute, and you've got a bunch of technologists on the phone. You may be out speaking to clients because security has become paramount in their day and they care about it more than they ever have before. And you got to make them feel okay about how you are securing your interactions with them. There is a tremendous amount of breadth that we are being asked to be able to speak to, and that has certainly grown over the last 5 years. I certainly feel it on a daily basis. And I think when you're running that security program, there's a couple of different ways you can do it, and I've seen it done badly, and I've seen it done really, really well. What I find, if you want longevity of a security culture in your organization, it is not about carrying the stick and making people fearful of doing something or not doing something. If you don't patch that vulnerability, you're going to get compromised. That is not the way to run a security program, in my opinion. My opinion is you educate. Right? You want an empowered executive team. You want an empowered board. You want empowered customers that all understand the role that they play in securing the organization. It takes a village. It really does. And when I sort of think through that 10-year period, we have gone from the back office and really being technology people into being client-facing, board-level, executive-speaking technologists. And that is not an easy transition to have to go through and do it with integrity and be able to provide a level of, or get a level of trust from the enterprise to make the decisions that need to be made. I think all of these guys made really great points. What keeps me up at night is not the breach. We've been dealing with the breach for a decade. What keeps me up at night is slowing down the business, because if the business slows down and they can't get into markets that make them viable, we don't have a business to protect. And that is really what I think about on a daily basis, is how do I make them go faster? How do I make security not the problem, or make security not the department of no? Because for a long time, it was very much about you can't do that, because I don't want to do the critical thinking about how do I enable you to do something that frightens me from a security standpoint? It puts me at risk. And when you're a security leader or a CISO, with the way that industry is moving, these roles are being held criminally and civilly accountable. If you are in a publicly traded company, Tim Brown, SolarWinds, was prosecuted by the SEC civilly and criminally for his role in the organization having a fiduciary responsibility to a shareholder. That's frightening, because I can tell, like everybody in this room, again, the amount of influence that you have compared to the CEO or the CFO, it pales in comparison for the most part. But everybody keeps saying that cybersecurity is the priority for the organization. We have to do it safely. We have to do it securely. And part of our job is building that influence, is building that trust at an enterprise level, and making sure that we consistently put security on the agenda, bake it into the strategy, becomes part of the DNA of the organization. And again, that is easier said than done. So, you want to jump in again, John?
Well, so one of the things, too, that I think you hit a really key point is that the job has evolved so that so much of it is about being an educator. Not just because we're talking about a highly technical industry where, people are talking about popping the stack, or I've got to do a buffer overflow. If you come in and you say that to the CEO or to the board, they're just going to stare at you. You have to be able to educate them in a manner that lets them understand the threat and the protections that need to be put in place without sounding like a talking head technologist, right? So the education piece is so critical today. And it's not just to educate the board or the C-suite. You also have to educate people, because if you can tell them why you're doing something, it usually helps immensely. And the other thing that I want to riff on a little bit was we don't want to be the department of no. In fact, I would say that every CISO or security leader only has a limited supply of hard no's.
Agreed.
And if you spend them, you don't get a restock. So you have to figure out a way to say yes and do it securely. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be done the way that somebody originally proposed it. You know, it may not be as frictionless, it may be a little less convenient, but we have to secure it while still allowing the business to do whatever it needs to do.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I do think when you are talking to executives inside of your organizations, they manage risks on a daily basis. This just happens to be one of them. It could be financial, it could be liquidity, it could be a bunch of different things. So if you become the barking dog, which a lot of security leaders do because they have the stick, right? And their influence, the way that they influence is with the stick. But if you invest in the education of the people around you over time, the decisions start to federate out into the organization. People start making the right decisions because they're the right decisions to make. That's when you've won the battle from a security standpoint. The enterprise is willing to do the right things from a security standpoint. They don't even need you at the table. And when you're in these roles and you're in that position where that culture now exists inside of your organizations, it makes these jobs just so much easier to be able to facilitate the conversations. It builds capacity for you to now become a business leader and start helping these folks enter marketplaces that they never would have gone into at speed and pace with integrity. And there's nothing worse than breaking into a market, getting compromised, and you've lost that entire market opportunity. Right? You have to save the business from themselves, let them do it safely and securely, and it will allow them to accelerate over time. So I'm going to come back to Ranjeet for a second. So when we talk about resilience, and you talk about resilience in traditional security, right? You've got disaster recovery, you've got business continuity, all of those sorts of things. You've been doing this a long time. How you defined it, I'm sure, as the ability to keep business services up and running, and you do that through your BCP plans and your DR plans. How do you think that's changing in the world today that we're about to enter into, or that we have entered into?
I think when you look at traditional security and incident response, it used to always be, how can I prevent incidents? How can I make sure we're not hacked? One of my first conversations with the LT when I joined the organization was, do you think we're going to be attacked? And I said, we're attacked on a monthly basis. You just don't know because no one's ever come and told you. Right? I have my cyber manager here. We were talking a couple of months ago, and I said, can you give me a listing of how many times we've been attacked that you are aware of, that you've been here? And there was like 7 attacks in 4 years of like what I would call a major attack, not the daily scans or otherwise, right? So I think when I look at preventing an attack, it's not assuming we're going to get attacked. You know you're going to get attacked. The question is, how high do you put business continuity and disaster recovery on it? It's, we're going through a DRP and PCP exercise within our IT function right now and our finance function. That's only 2 functions out of, call them 15, 20 within our community. So if every area doesn't have a BCP or a DRP, it's really kind of pointless. Let's say there is a natural disaster. Let's go away from cyber for a moment. And, we lose some of our buildings, we lose our fiber, et cetera. Sure, I can enable a BCP or DRP for our technology stack, but it doesn't really do us any value if our res, if our payroll, all these other areas don't have a backup plan. When you look a couple of years ago when we had the CrowdStrike incident, that happened to be our payroll day at the organization I was with. But all of our systems were down. And so we're trying to recover. And then my CFO called me because I had a dual line to I actually didn't report into IT in my last role. I had a dual line with a VP of HR and our CFO. So I was leading the digital transformation for our health authority. And she said, when is system ABC coming up? And I said, I don't know. I haven't seen it on any lists. What's the issue? And she said, well, today's payroll. I need to get people paid. And I said, okay, got it. I want to get paid. And she said, but it's even worse than that. I said, okay, how's it worse? And that was the year we were doing our annual uplifts. So she already had her whole payroll team doing overtime all weekend and that Friday. And she said, if this doesn't happen, I don't know how I get this processed. And I don't even know how to tell my bank, pay people because I can't get you the file. And I said, okay, do we have a documented BCP? Knowing the answer was going to be no. And she said, we do. I said, great. I've been here a year and a half. I've never heard about that. Can you send it to me? I don't know where it is. The person who knew where it was on vacation. So it was kind of pointless, right? So anyways, I was like, okay, that's a tomorrow problem. Let's just get the system back up. So we bumped it on the priority list, got it back up. But anyways, going back to the question, a week and a half later, I got a copy of the BCP. And I don't think any of you will be surprised if I tell you it was not a BCP. All it was a list of people and titles. Here's the CTO's number. Right. Here's our bank. Here's their toll-free number to call for support. And so I said to her, this is not a BCP. You're under a fake fallacy that you have a BCP and you can actually recover. I said, well, what would happen if I didn't get your system up that day? I wouldn't have got people paid, was her response, right? So even though I had a BCP for some of my technology systems, I wasn't responsible for Meditech, which was the payroll system at the time. And as a result, people wouldn't have got paid. So I did some research afterwards, and majority of people will leave an organization if they miss two paychecks, whether they're living day-to-day or otherwise. If their org can't pay them twice, they will drop on a day's notice if they can find another role. And when I look at any organization, staffing is your number one. If you don't have staff to do your role, your job, no matter where you are, you've lost. You're not going to be able to provide any service. So it's not just IT or cyber or a function, understanding the value of BCP and DRP, and ensuring everyone is along for that ride, because every department has a role in your organization.
I would agree. Hung?
Yes, I think security and resilience, they're really related, but they're not the same thing, in my opinion. Taking incident response as an example, we have to realize that incident response is no longer just a technical recovery function. It is a leadership and governance function that's really critical to the organization nowadays. Organization must prepare not only just for the containment or restoration, but also for operational continuity, stakeholder communication, more importantly, regulatory exposure, legal consideration, and in some worst case, its reputational impact. These kind of things often happening simultaneously and under huge pressure. Think about one day, if your organization got a big hit of ransomware, as a CISO, what are you going to do with that, right? So the situation is that the most important thing is how effectively what really separate mature organization is not whether incident would occur. Incidents are inevitable. The real differentiator is how effectively leadership adapt, communicate, and then recover, restore, and respond while still maintaining institutional trust. And I strongly believe that strong crisis leadership does require clarity, preparation, discipline, and calm decision-making under uncertainty. Security helps us prevent incidents, but resilience really decides whether or how well we can recover from them. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing is that we need to fill the gap, especially like you mentioned about the knowledge sharing or education, put it in this way, to fill the knowledge gap between us and the CEO. Sometimes their perspective and our perspective is very different. They understand the things or see the things in an operational lens. We are seeing the things in a governance lens. So we have to make sure these two lenses converge into one. That's the most important thing. I'll give you very briefly about one example. Is that, for example, if you are organizational CEO asking you about a question, say that, hey, Hong, or ask me, Hong, from our policy and guidance, AI guidance, it says that we're not allowed to use generative AI to process personal or confidential information. Am I allowed to do so? Oh, are you going to say yes or no? Well, if you say yes, that's absolutely a no-no. If you're saying a no, it looks like you're not cooperative. So The middle way is that we need independent technical assessment and going through a governance body to approve it. And they will follow up with another question. I have already had access to those personal information. Why am I not allowed to use Microsoft Copilot to process it? Well, the situation is that you have access to those information, personal information, does not necessarily mean you have the authority to use them. That's the privacy law. It's already above the IT management or IT governance. So in other words, as CISO or CIO, will not only deal with AI policy, we are deal with privacy, we are deal with insurance coverage, we are dealing with legal issues. All together, one day we will be a lawyer too.
All right, John, you've got obviously responsibilities, I'm guessing, with regards to building out resilience in a private company, but you've also got responsibilities to the service consumers of your services. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because that is a different dynamic. Keeping your services up and running to protect the many while you're also doing the same thing to protect your organization. There's some complexity there.
Sure. So within our organization, we have a very security-focused mindset. And so it can be relatively easy to convince the organization to undertake security initiatives. That's one thing. It's another thing when you're talking about trying to implement security controls or safeguards or policies on behalf of the client-facing services. Because, we support hundreds of organizations, thousands, tens of thousands of nodes, and guess what? Each one belongs to somebody who wants to run their business in their own way. And oftentimes they have no idea about the depth and breadth of cybersecurity risk and threats. And so, again, you have to lean into the education part. One of the things when I changed roles, I was previously leading our customer-facing security practice, and then I finally, after about a decade, got to just focus on our security. Well, I have more customer meetings now than ever because so much about getting our customers secure is convincing them to do what we would hope they would do anyway. But and it's not to denigrate the customer because they don't know. They're in business to do X, Y, or Z. They're not in business to be a security professional. And so, so much of what we do and so much of what I do on a daily basis, it has to be done with a mind perspective of two different audiences. What do I need to do internally to make sure we're not the threat vector? But what do I also need to do that will be palatable to less informed? Maybe some folks, there may be businesses that are startup and they don't care about risk. That's their gig. It's all about taking a big risk, big swing for a big reward. But you still have to get them in there. And so there's some aspects of our services that are non-negotiable, because we can't afford the liability to take on somebody who's not going to secure their environment. Because what happens when systems go down, security incidents happen, who gets the call? The IT folks, and that's us. And it doesn't matter how many times we've told you something, there's still somebody who's going to claim, but you're the expert. So we do have minimum standards that if you can't meet this standard, we will not service you. We will not take you on as a client. And then there's a range of other controls depending on the security and compliance needs of the customer. We support a lot of industries, but it's a lot different if you're talking about a marketing organization versus a healthcare or maybe a defense manufacturer. And so the range of solutions we have to have, you have to have a continuum of tools. It would be great to only have to take care of one business, one industry, but in fact, we have to find the commonalities that will scale across all of them and then decide what's optional and what's not. And as I'm sure everybody here has probably seen in the industry, there's getting to be more and more stuff that's no longer optional. In the US, the HIPAA regulation that the keynote was talking about earlier, it's not highly prescriptive with the specific control, how you implement them. It says you have to have controls that do this. But because they want it to scale from the smallest organization to the biggest organization, there's a lot of references to reasonable and appropriate for your size. Well, if you're a mom and pop shop, your security looks a lot different from, a multi-billion-dollar industry. But there are commonalities, and we have to figure out a way to get those in place. But ultimately, it's that dichotomy. How do I protect us? How do I make sure our clients are secure? And how do we make it palatable for the client? You have to be able to implement some pretty significant security controls with the least amount of friction, because maybe the people that need those controls don't understand them.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm going to riff a little bit on what you were just talking about, John, because I think resilience doesn't have to be a complicated endeavor. You have to understand what are the most critical aspects of your business, what are the technologies, the data, the services that allow those services to be delivered to your clients, and you need to spend time understanding how you want to protect them and how you want to make them available. You want the 5 nines. You want consistent availability of those capabilities. We all have organizations. Yes, you could try to plug all the holes. Yes, you could try to keep pace with, all of the patching and all of the software updates and everything that has to happen. The reality is we are entering an age where prioritization does not exist. Think about that for a second. You've got machine learning models out there that will be able to scan through your environments 24/7, 365, identify previously undisclosed vulnerabilities, exploit them, write malware for them, attack them, compromise them, all autonomously, 24/7, 365. So the notion of resilience that we had a year ago no longer applies. So now we have a new paradigm that we have to sort of think our way through. This is going to be about where are my critical things? Where are my critical systems? Where is my critical data? How have I granted access to those things? Can I make some decisions about being able to segment off aspects of my technology environment to add additional layers of protection so threat actors can't get to them? So I think to me, we have to sort of simplify the approach and how we want to drive resiliency through the organization. Now, that being said, we spent the last 2 years building out what we would refer to as critical business services. And in our organization, we have 34 of them. When we define those critical business services, we look at every component of that service. And when we do our testing, we test the entire thing end to end. We fail it over and we test it. You have to be able to run transactions through it. You have to be able to have a network for it to run on, all of those sorts of things. And what we've certainly found is at a component level, we have resilience. But when you look at it at a service level, there's multiple things that can break it. You will go through disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning. The businesses will define, hey, I've got a 48-hour RTO. And then you actually get into it and you realize that they want this thing up in 6 hours and they haven't built the infrastructure, they haven't invested in the services, the support, all of that sort of stuff. By building out a view of your critical business services, you can start to ask some really hard questions and make sure that that entire service is resilient. And if you are a part of the delivery of that service, you do not want to be the long pole in the tent. So that's one thing I would say that has been a big lesson learned for us is how do we organize our thinking around it. The other thing I would say is, and having gone through, I've been a little long in the tooth at RBC, but we deal with upwards of probably 150 to 200 incidents in our third parties and internally per year. And I can absolutely, unequivocally tell you that the people are the hardest part in the resilience equation. When you have incidents that last for 25 days, 30 days, and you have to go 24/7 round the clock, you have to get to a decision point very, very quickly where you can take your staff, you can break them apart, you can get them into rolling shifts, but now you've got weekends, and now you've got holidays coming up, and these people start to burn out. As a leader that's sort of front and center during an incident, I can tell you, There is a battle rhythm that you get into, and there are times when you're done. You've had enough conversations, you've been up for 15 hours, you're talking to clients, you're talking to regulators, you're doing all of these things, and there's a lot of security leaders in this room that will be in this position. You need a good group of lieutenants around you. You need people that you can download things onto that can run with certain aspects of incident response. You need to have a plan. I go back to education. Educating the organization and all of the roles that need to be around a table when the crisis event happens to you, because it will happen, I guarantee you. And during the time that it happens is not the time to figure out the plan. You have to have it, you have to practice it. It's a muscle, just like everything else. So I'm going to finish off with pieces of advice, and because I'm talking, I'm going to go first, and then we'll go down the table. But if I was going to tell you to take one thing away from today, it is preparation, education, communication. You need to prepare yourselves. You need to educate people on the roles that they play in a time of crisis, and you need to understand how you're going to communicate it. And it's a very simple way, and if whoever was here earlier, I like things in threes. But when you sit down and you start to identify people in the organization that are going to be responsible for executing activities during a crisis, you want role clarity. You don't want to be explaining things in the middle of a crisis. So, my 2 cents. Hong, I'll go to you next.
Yes, the future of cybersecurity will not be defined solely by better technology. It will be defined by how wisely we govern them. And as AI becomes increasingly capable of generating intelligence, I strongly believe we will rely on wisdom much more, because wisdom is not simply knowing more. It is exercising sound judgment when certainty is impossible. And the technology we choose will shape our future. However, the quality of our judgment will decide if that future is secure. And I remember what Winston Churchill said. The farther backward we can look, the farther forward we are likely to see. So, it is very important to always make use or learn from our past experience and make use of them to have a good and wise decision for our better future.
Well said. Ranjeet?
For me, when you're talking to your team, when you're talking to your peers externally, it's okay to talk tech. What John was saying earlier. When you're talking upwards, whether it's your CFO, your president, or your board, the piece of advice I would give you is to never talk technology. Go back to your organization's outcomes and your values. Tie everything you talk about to that. So for me, it's student outcomes, it's student success. So if I go and ask for $1 million in our upcoming budget for our next fiscal, I don't go say I'm going to go buy a Palo Alto or a Fortinet or a CrowdStrike or implement this. I want to talk about the services. I don't want to say dumb it down, but I'm going to take the technology out of it. Everyone understands money. Everyone understands your business values. So when you look at talking to leaders within your organization, I know it's easy because we're technologists. It's very easy to talk tech. I can talk half hour about how I used to configure routers back in the day and firewalls, right? And build PCs. The thought of building a new PC scares me. I just go to the Apple store and buy a MacBook for my kids and I'm done with it. But when you're talking to your president, she doesn't want to hear about buffer overflows. They do want to talk about patching. They don't want to talk about the tool you're going to use for it. They don't want to talk about what you need. They want to know your metrics. How are you going to reduce it? Talk business, talk numbers, talk financial. Don't talk technology.
Great point. John?
So ultimately, presumably most of us here are technologists. We're here because we like the ones and zeros or the results thereof. But ultimately, it doesn't matter how secure a system is once you introduce people if they're not part of the solution. So to me, the biggest thing I feel like you can take away is building security culture. Everybody, we've talked a lot about AI. What's the other buzzword in today's modern environment? Influencers. Well, that really does encapsulate what we all need to be, is a security influencer. Because it's not enough to say it. It's not enough to secure it. If you then have the people using it who don't understand it or don't understand their part in that security. So if we can influence them, build that culture so that everybody realizes we're all on the same team, it's not the department of no, it's the department of how we can do it safely, and you enlist people to be your allies. To me, one of the greatest indicators of success as a security leader is not how many times you say no. It's not how many times you have to go track down something in whatever department to squirrel out and find out what the heck they're doing. It's how many times do they come to you proactively with a business problem and say, hey, I need to do this for the business. It doesn't matter what department, but if they are involved in that culture, instead of having to go chase them around to secure it, sometimes they'll come to you first. And that to me is a great metric, is how many conversations have I had in any given day or week before there was a problem. And I would attribute that to be directly relational to the culture that you've helped build.
Yeah, 100% agree. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. We're going to open it up for Q&A. I know it's the end of the day. There's probably a lot of tired brains out there. The drinks are coming, but is any questions in the room? Anything that anybody wants to table with us before we get down off the stage? Okay.
Hello. Gentlemen, appreciate the insights so far. On the subject of this, relationship with the business as a technology leader, a risk I've observed with AI is how it can influence ideas and decisions within the business. Let's frame that as maybe you're speaking to a board member and they say, hey, ChatGPT had a look at your roadmap or that proposal you sent in and doesn't like it, so I can't support this. Have you encountered this? And if so, how have you fought that battle to win those hearts and minds?
Ranjeet, he reached right for the microphone, so I'm guessing there's a story here.
There's too many stories. I'll save most of them for the bar because I think we're online. But I think it is a good point. So I have had that recently. And it's understanding, when you talk to ChatGPT and you say, here's a problem, it'll give you a view, right? It's not actually being objective in what it gives you. So I did have a meeting about a month ago where I had a senior executive say, oh, you told us in this meeting you can't do it. Actually, I asked Copilot, because we have institutional Copilot, they were allowed to use it and say, here's what Copilot said. And you read this 5-page output on why I was wrong in the meeting, and then you look at the caveats at the bottom, and it says, it depends on your industry, it depends on your organization, it depends on your technology stack. And, those are the nuggets. So I said, the output you gave me from Copilot is actually telling me why I was correct, because these caveats that put at the bottom are actually our environment. So while I understand you as a technologist may not know that, it's very easy for anyone to be an armchair technologist and go to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or Grok or whatever you want to use. Hopefully it's not DeepSeek. But it's really that objectivity, it's that learned experience, right? When you look at technology, you have to be able to take a biased view or maybe an unbiased view and say why it's correct or incorrect. And when you're looking at armchair technologists with artificial intelligence, you have to be able to pick those nuggets out and say, here's the chink in that armor, or why it's wrong, or why it's right.
I just want to add one single point. I will really remind them that you are using generative AI, you have to be very careful because it is a pattern-based. It identifies pattern based on data and produce and predicts based on the learning data and probability. In other words, it doesn't understand the meaning of the data, which is contextual meaning. So I will remind them always, which I have already, that wait a little bit until cognitive computing is in place, which is simulate the human thought process by synthesizing, interpreting, and reasoning, and weighting multiple factors to provide us the most logical recommendation and insight.
One of the things I would say is You're not going to replace 25 years of human experience operating inside of an organization with a Copilot or a ChatGPT. And the reason being is it lacks the context of the organization. It doesn't have institutional knowledge. Most of the decisions that we make as security leaders require us to understand the technology environment, understand how it relates to the business priorities of the business services. And while the frontier models, I think, are incredibly valuable for knowledge acquisition, is being able to take those learnings and apply them to the institution that you're working in is where the experience comes in, and you can't replace that. So, as we see this evolution and how fast things are moving and the new technologies that are emerging, I do think it gives you a perspective. But for all of us in the room that run security programs, you want diverse perspectives as you're trying to determine this solution to a problem. It is not going to give you that. And I think that's where, when you sit down with board members, this is, again, part education, is the reason that you have me here is because I understand the business, I understand the client, I understand the operating environment, I understand the regulatory environment, all of those things. And I can use this tool to inform my perspective. But it's one piece to the puzzle when you're doing more complex solutioning, in my opinion. John?
So how many of you out there have ever been posed a security question where you could just answer? Or do invariably you have to lead with about 6 or 7 more questions to get the context, to get the understanding? My most common answer whenever anybody asks me a security question is, well, that depends. What about X, Y, and Z? And so that's the part that, like Eric was saying, the models don't get. And I don't know that there's too many absolutes in security. Again, especially if you've got a limited, bundle of no's. You have to figure out all those details, and that context is so critical. And so I think that's something important to take away, too, is that you have to learn to ask more questions and get people to understand that there's no absolutes, other than probably the answer is going to be it depends until you give me more information.
All right, folks. Thank you for attending the session. Drinks being served next door. I think we're winding it up. Is Andrew in the room? He's not in the room. There he is. Thank you for attending today, folks, and hopefully we have some good conversations outside the hall. Thanks for coming. Cool. All right. We're just going to stay right here? Yeah, sure. That's fantastic. Look at that.
We thought we'd have... Mike, can you... Okay.
He's got full hands, Mike.
RBC. They are our happy hour sponsor as our premium platinum sponsor today. And they have a signature cocktail called the Royal Spritz. So we thought, why not treat the panel?
Why wouldn't you?
They've been talking for a good hour. So it's beautifully, beautifully branded, beautifully themed. And I took a quick taste so that I could genuinely say, it's lovely. So the bar is open.